You're on the right one.
All right, good morning, everybody. It's good to be with you. Let's talk a little bit about AI. Now, admittedly, I just wanted an excuse to research something that I'm interested in. But also, new technologies just cause new controversies. And so I want to provide you with a fairly non-technical summary of just basic concepts about AI, then talk a little bit about how to ethically address AI in our work as helping professionals, and then explore aspects of AI that might uniquely impact people who have psychosis. But first, I'm just going to make a disclaimer that my goal today is to start a discussion. I'm just interested in how this impacts our work. And so to do this, I was pretty expansive as I reviewed the literature. Some of the sources I cite aren't peer reviewed, but they have interesting and useful ideas. And so because AI is an emerging technology and the conversation around this is all really new, I thought, let's just survey what's out there and kind of see what we can learn. All right, so what are large language models? LLMs are built through what we know is called machine learning. And so machine learning involves computer systems that are designed to learn patterns from very large sets of data. They use sophisticated algorithms to detect patterns from training data sets, and then they generate new data based on those patterns. And so LLMs have been described as giant statistical prediction machines. And I think that really does capture the essence of how they work. They make predictions about words using statistics. And so LLMs make these predictions by converting text into tokens. And you can see on the screen an example of a chunk of text highlighted in color and the way the LLM broke it up into different tokens. Tokens are words or parts of words. And through tokenization, text is broken up into smaller pieces that LLMs can understand and work with. Then they process the relationships between these tokens in order to predict the next correct token. There is also a post-training procedure called reinforcement learning from human feedback. And with this procedure, human beings score responses, and that refines the model. And so since humans are involved in that part of the process, human cognitive biases can become embedded in the chatbot's model. But even though human beings are involved in post-training, embedding human values into LLMs is really difficult. The ratings that are used are essentially thumbs up and thumbs down ratings, not much different from the types of reactions that you might see on different social media platforms. These ratings are really crude proxies for our complex set of human values. They don't really capture the nuance in human thinking. And when engineers try to embed human values into the model, but they fail to do so, they call this a proxy failure. And basically, what that is a values misalignment. Also, there's just a benefit to the model to make guesses, a statistical benefit there. So just kind of keep that in mind as you think about how it aligns with values. So because human language is really complex and nuanced, it's not possible to predict all of the things that a person might prompt a chatbot to evaluate. And so as a result, AI systems can't completely guarantee safe output. Often only the most obviously harmful outputs can be detected and corrected, but human language has a lot of subtleties that are difficult for LLM models to catch. And so how does this apply to us? Ethical standards that relate to AI directly are still emerging, but there are ethical standards that pertain to technology in a more general way. And so I took one example here from the American Counseling Association standards that invites counselors to attempt to become knowledgeable about technological resources. And you'll have to check your ethics codes if you're regulated by one to see what pertains to you. But since AI systems are being developed and deployed in a large variety of contexts, we just need to be familiar enough with how these systems function so that we can understand how they impact our work. I will say this morning, actually, I searched to see if there were any updated guidelines. Didn't have time to do an exhaustive search, but the American Psychological Association does have some published guidance now on the use of AI, and the link is in the slide right there. And so how are people using AI systems in healthcare? Well, some use cases include clinician training and role playing. Harry and I have actually kind of experimented with that privately just to see how it works. They're often used in drafting clinical documentation, and a lot of agencies are using products that listen to session material and then transcribe and interpret that material. AI has also been used to write intervention manuals or to provide feedback to professionals on their interactions with people. And so, for example, in one randomized controlled trial, LLMs were used to provide peer supporters with feedback on their use of empathic statements with people. And that trial showed positive results with increasing those empathic responses in those peer supporters. And so I think that does show that there is a targeted use of AI that can be helpful for some purposes. But a more controversial application of AI involves delivering mental health services to people with LLMs acting as therapists. And I read one study that said that up to 25% of US adults reported using LLMs for psychological support, and they have favorable views of them. Just have to be aware of that. But there are some limitations and some risks to using AI systems that we should be aware of. And first, it's important to know that the underlying principles of how AI systems work are not yet well understood. That understanding is emerging and developing. Also, AI systems can produce information that's inaccurate or misleading, and this is in part because LLMs produce information from the data that was used to train it. And the most accurate and updated sources of information might not have been used in the model's pre-training. It's also important to know that biases that are present in the training data can impact the responses generated by LLM. So I've seen information about these models just scooping up information from sources like Reddit and other online forums and social media sites. It's just important to be aware that that's a source of information, and it's not just pulling from expert sources. A related issue is that how AI systems may impact people who have psychosis in particular. And so one thing we do know is that new technologies are often incorporated into the delusional belief systems that people with psychosis develop. This isn't really new, but the primary difference here involves that AI systems are interactive. The responses AI chatbots provide feel personal and influential. They also tend to be excessively agreeable and may unintentionally collude with people who have delusions. And so in the tech world, excessive agreeableness has been called sycophancy. In our foundational training, we talk about how to empathically disagree with people who have psychosis so that we don't collude, but we preserve the relationship. But AI systems are not designed to do this unless they're specifically prompted to do so. And so one important risk for people with psychosis is the potential for what we call belief amplification. Beliefs can be amplified by a feedback loop where a person and an AI system mutually reinforce each other. And this can happen because AI systems tend to be agreeable, excessively so. The risk here is that an echo chamber of one can develop. A person's belief can be validated in an uncritical way through an iterative process. So in the example on the right, a vulnerable person might seek out support from an AI system. The AI chatbot might respond in a validating way that reinforces the person's beliefs, and this is how the cycle keeps going. And so for those of you who are familiar with CBTp, everybody in this audience, you might see that this has some similarity to something you've seen before. This is kind of like a specific maintenance formulation. AI systems output might trigger that cycle to start, or they might just help maintain maladaptive thinking expressed by the person who prompts the model. However the cycle starts, it's pretty easy to see that the outputs can keep the cycle going. It's also important to know that the output produced by AI chatbots can sometimes collude with delusional beliefs. They also tend not to challenge false claims, and they sometimes can actually produce false information. And so, ironically, for this audience, the tech industry sometimes calls this hallucinating. Um, so for example, AI chatbots might miss nuanced indicators of suicidal ideation. The model's response might also unintentionally cause harm by providing details to people who are suicidal and how to engage in suicidal actions in response to the prompts that are typed in that lead them in that direction. I don't know if anybody's seen this movie. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but I thought it was appropriate here. Another risk here that I want you to be aware of is anthropomorphic projection, basically projecting human characteristics onto AI systems. Again, AI chatbots produce text that often makes people feel like the system understands them and cares about them. But it's important for people to remember that these are human characteristics that are simulated in these systems. You're not interacting with a person, you're interacting with code. And so the real risk here is that people will increasingly replace meaningful relationships with pseudo relationships that feel genuine but actually aren't. So, how do we mitigate the risks? Well, there's a couple strategies we can use. First, it's a good idea to review anything produced by an AI system to make sure that it doesn't contain harmful output. This is called putting a human in the loop, a person who can evaluate the output of an AI system. Second, from the user's perspective, it's important to learn how to write effective prompts. Prompts are the instructions that you type into the chat in order to make the AI system generate a response. And then third, for mental health professionals, we should incorporate some way of identifying patterns of use in people that receive your services and just be prepared to provide some psychoeducation about the risks that are involved with using AI. Developing effective prompts improves the model's performance. This is called prompt engineering. And so the quality of the prompt really matters here. There's 4 principles for writing good prompts. Good prompts are clear and structured. They provide the model with enough information to generate the output the user is looking for. And so how do you write an effective prompt? Well, first, you have to describe a clear task. The prompt should describe the goal that the person wants to achieve. So for example, a person might write something like, I think people in public are watching me. Help me figure out if this thought is accurate. Second, the input data should be described. So what sources do you want the model to use to generate a response? So for example, you might have somebody write something like, base your answer on strategies people use to cope with anxiety. Third, contextual information should be provided. It really helps the model understand how to process your prompt too. So for example, you might write something like, this usually happens when I'm at the store and I feel anxious. And finally, the user should also identify the prompt style. How do you want the model to sound when it generates the response? And so, for example, a person might write something like, help me make sense of what happened using reason and logic. So this is an example of that prompt strung together. A lot of different ways you can write prompts, and you can try on your own different strategies. I tried to think of a prompt that is not too professional so that it would be something that maybe somebody with psychosis who's not super tech savvy might still type something in plain language, but still would kind of guide them in the right direction. But you can experiment. And so for us, let's talk about assessing AI use. These are some examples of some assessment questions that therapists or other providers might ask to figure out what AI-related vulnerabilities people have. If memory serves me right, these questions actually came from a preprint from engineers who work at Google DeepMind. I'll have to double check that, but it was really interesting that they came up with these questions. They assess a lot of the things that we assess in other areas, including the frequency of use, the purpose of use, and the consequences of use. Really, the goal here, any question that gets you a sense of how a person is interacting with an AI system will get you good information. And so I'll end here by talking about some of the potential benefits of LLMs just to stay balanced and objective here. Much of this is speculative, but the possibilities are interesting and worth considering. And so first, the low-hanging fruit, AI systems might be able to provide some really low-level psychological support. Many people lack access to professional mental health services, but there might be some use cases where people who are struggling might be able to use AI to think through very common mental health challenges through dialogue. For people with psychosis, an intriguing possibility might be opportunities or to have their experiences normalized. Because the model is not a person, it might not respond in a stigmatizing way, depending on how they prompt it. It also might provide chances to practice social skills in a safe environment. It might even get some support with reality testing. It might support that in some way. And also, it can just be potentially a way to disrupt or distract from the voice hearing experience. But again, these are all speculative uses. And given that artificial intelligence is going to be a part of our lives for the foreseeable future, I just think it's worthwhile to think about how we can leverage these systems for good uses. And so really, that's it. Any questions?